Okay, so I'm here today to talk about Quiet Riot's debut US album, 1983's Metal Health. Yes, I have the picture disc. No, I don't have the standard vinyl version, but this sounds good enough to me. I don't know why everybody bitches about picture disc sound quality all the time. I haven't had any trouble with it, and I am picky. We all know I'm picky, right? So, anyway. Time to get into some Quiet Riot. I also have this digitally remastered from the original tapes version on CD. And what is that? 2001 that was done. I got it for $3.99, being the cheap bastard that I am. We all know. I'm not crazy about the look they gave the CD itself, but it sure sounds pretty good. And glad to have that. Okay. Yes, for anyone who still isn't aware, Metal Health was the band's first album to receive a worldwide release, as the first two albums were released only in Japan, because that was the only record deal the band could get at that point when Randy Rhoads was still a member and they were trying to get signed. And finally, somebody said, "Well, we'll sign you, but it's only going to get released in Japan." And they were like, "Okay." Can't really blame them at that point, but little did they know. And this album and this band are severely unappreciated by many people. But to me, Metal Health is truly one of the game-changing albums in hard rock history. I will go into that part of it a little bit more as this review goes on, but to do that, first, I think it's absolutely essential that we talk about the timeline. So it's 1983. As far as hard rock albums go, or what would have then been called metal albums predominantly, the release order goes something like this. Def Leppard's Pyromania comes out on January 20th of 83. Journey's Frontiers album comes out February 1st. Then Lizzie's Thunder and Lightning comes out March 4th. There are a few others, but those are sort of the ones I felt was appropriate to mention. And then March 11th, 1983, this guy appears in record and cassette racks all over the place for the first time. Now, you might say, well, I'm sure the first single was out a few months before that date, Dave, but you'd be wrong. See, it didn't always happen that way back in the old days. In fact, Come On Feel the Noize, which was the first single that they released from this album, didn't get released until August from an album that came out in March. Anyway, back to March. I know it's really hard, that's what she said, to do, but you have to try to keep this straight in your mind. At the time we were hearing this thing for the first time, there was no 1984. There was no Shout at the Devil. There was no Stay Hungry, no Bark at the Moon, no Lick It Up. None of the tons of amazing hard rock and metal albums we got in 1984. None of that. At the point when Metal Health hit stores, we had basically Pyromania, which was less than a month old. And before that, a bunch of stuff from like 1980, like Back in Black, Blizzard of Oz, British Steel. But let's be honest, at that point, 90% of us weren't listening to Kiss anymore. And we were mostly all caught up in this strange little world where we were 10 or 12 years old or whatever, and way more concerned about our hair or getting a girlfriend than we were keeping close tabs on a hard rock and metal scene that we literally had no idea was about to explode all over the world. Now, I think it's worth repeating. You really have to stop and think about the timing at this point before we can go forward. Pyromania is out, but you probably haven't heard it yet, or if you have, just barely. And yes, the first single from that album, Photograph, was also released in January of '83, same as the album was. But I personally remember hearing that song on the radio for the first time in the summer of that year when I was at the pool one day or something, probably. And I could be remembering that wrong. It's certainly possible, but that seems pretty clear in my head. Anyway, my point about all that is in March of 1983, we were basically living in a world of the Police and Air Supply and all those short ties and spiked hairdos, and there are keyboards everywhere. And I mean, Thriller came out in late 1982, but it was just starting to really hit its stride and hit number one in February of '83, right before Mental Health comes out. So, Michael Jackson was absolutely dominating the music scene at that point. Based on the success of their albums, bands like Def Leppard and ZZ Top and Bruce Springsteen would join him all over our radios and TVs throughout that year. And Mental Health didn't really seem to be doing much in the first part of the year, honestly. But then that first single, Come On, Feel the Noize, came out, and in November of 1983, the album knocks Synchronicity out of the number one spot, which is totally unheard of up until the moment it happens. If you weren't alive or were still a toddler or something back then, trust me, there was no way an album with loud guitars was going to get to the number one spot on the albums chart. No chance. And then it did. And then, thank goodness, and maybe not, the floodgates fly open. I honestly think that was more a combination of Pyromania and Mental Health than either one of them alone. But either way, it was finally happening. And now, where people like my friends and I who love this kind of music, but before that had a handful of top-tier bands like Sabbath, Zeppelin, Deep Purple, 70s Kiss, Van Halen, Judas Priest, and smaller but also appealing acts such as early Crocus and Iron Maiden, suddenly we're about to be handed the keys to the kingdom and be introduced to up-and-coming bands like Motley Crue, Rat, Dokken, Twisted Sister, Night Ranger, Metallica, and about a gazillion others. Now, several of those bands might have been signed to major labels anyway, but for those of us who lived through that time, I think there's absolutely no question in our minds that the reasons we got a bunch of the debut albums we did in '84 and '85, '86, and '87 were these two albums, Mental Health and Pyromania. They just blew the doors off. Suddenly, it was cool to be in a hard rock band. It was cool to have all that hair. It was cool to wear all that spandex and leather. It was cool to scream out vocals instead of sounding like the tall blonde guy with the lower voice in Air Supply.
I'm lying alone
Now, if you look it up on Wikipedia, you'll see them say that, quote, Metal Health was the first heavy metal album to reach #1 on the Billboard 200 chart, end quote. Now, do I believe Metal Health is a metal album? No, absolutely not. Just like I don't believe Pyromania is a metal album. But back in '83, yeah, that's what we called them. So how does that change to my viewpoint today, where I call albums like these hard rock instead of metal? Well, it changes because now I've heard bands like mid to late '80s Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, and all the death and doom and black and power metal bands that came out later. I don't like that stuff personally, but I can't and won't try to deny its existence. And I certainly won't put Quiet Riot and Def Leppard in the same genre either. But like I said, in 1983, that's absolutely what we thought this stuff was. Metal. Everybody did. Well, everybody except the people I knew who were consistently telling me that stuff isn't really metal. Those guys couldn't hold a candle to a band like Priest or Sabbath. Okay, now, there are several things about this band and this album and this time that I want to try to address in this video, because there was a lot going on in this world at that time, and a lot of that involved these guys. Well, their singer and main mouthpiece in the press anyway, but we'll get there in a little bit. For now, let's go ahead and talk about the album itself. First, the cover. I like it. It really stood out on a shelf, so it did its job. Nothing else looked like this at that time. I don't remember ever seeing this exact color combination before this. The track list, 10 songs. That's what you got back then, either 9 or 10. 8 is what you were used to if you were a big Sabbath fan in the '70s. Now, one thing about the track list that I have mentioned a few times before and will mention again right here is the different running order you got on the LP and eventually the CD versus the cassette that most of us bought back in the '80s. That cassette had a different running order than the album or later on the CD. And it was the running order that I fell in love with and is still the running order that feels right to me. There was one difference. Tracks 3 and 8 from the vinyl were swapped out for the cassette, so that track 3 on the album was Don't Want to Let You Go. But on the cassette, track 3 was the Carlos Cavazo guitar solo, Battle Axe. So you end up with side 1 being Metal Health, Come On Feel the Noize, Battle Axe, Slick Black Cadillac, and Love's a Bitch. I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but to me, that's a perfect side 1. Perfect. To a large extent, because of Battle Axe being the 3rd track. I think a lot of albums back then, it always seemed like track 3, whatever it was one of the absolute best songs on the albums. It was usually one of the singles, often the main single, and it was sometimes really the peak of those albums. And then a friend brings this tape over to my house one day and plays it for me, and I hear this guitar solo thing right smack in the middle of side 1, and it just completely blows my mind. Because it's the greatest thing I've ever heard a guitarist do? No, it really isn't, though I do think it's really cool. Because it's track 3 on the freaking album. And yes, okay, Eruption was the second thing we hear on Van Halen 1, but that was in '78. So 5 years earlier already. And I still wasn't really into Van Halen yet at this point. So I may have heard Metal Health before I really heard the first Van Halen album. I can't swear to that, but I think it might have been the case. Shame on me, I know, but I can't really help the order in which I was introduced to things, can I? Anyway, I think all four of the songs on side one are pretty awesome. But having that guitar piece squished in between them somehow just made them even better to me. And it seemed like something that took a certain amount of guts, something that sort of immediately separated these guys from all the pop bands and air supplies that were taking up most of the air in the room in those days. I just loved it being where it was. The problem was, I only wanted to hear side one. I really didn't like anything on side two back then. How I feel in 2024, you're going to have to wait for my ratings of the songs to find out. But that's how I felt back then. And I kept trying. I would play side two every once in a while just to see if those songs would start to grow on me at all. But they just never seemed to, at least for a couple of years. I'm pretty sure that by 1985 or so, I'd finally heard that Thunderbird was written as a tribute to Randy Rhoads. And if there has always been one thing I loved enough to give it my undivided attention, it was Randy Rhoads. So that helped. But even to this day, while I finally do think some of the tracks on side two are pretty cool, they just honestly feel mostly like filler to me and always have. To the extent, in fact, that if I was to make up a list of the most heavily front-loaded hard rock and metal albums of all time, this album would be in that top 10 somewhere. And no, I don't plan on actually doing that list. I just thought I'd mention that. Okay, so now let's talk tracks. And then I'll definitely have some more things I'd like to discuss briefly after that. Track one, Metal Health.
Axe grinder, pile driver. Mama says that I never mind her. Got no brains, I'm insane. The teacher says that I'm one big brain. I'm like a laser, six-string razor. I got a mouth like an alligator. I want it louder, more power. I'm gonna rock it till it strikes the hour.
Written by Kevin DuBrow, Carlos Cavazo, and Frankie Banali. I mean, it's freaking Metal Health, for goodness sake. Obviously, it gets 5 stars. It's really a totally iconic moment in music history when you get right down to it, I think. And this is where I have to start saying some things that are going to make me sound like a hopeless fanboy, even though I'm actually not in Quiet Riot's case. But man, could these guys write a song in 1982 and 83? Because let's face it, iconic songs are almost always iconic for a very good reason. And this one is no exception. Great riffs, great arrangement, great lyrics, great vocal, great drumming, great bass part, great mix, just really great everything. It's honestly astounding in a lot of ways. And I mean, it's easy to look back from 41 years later and think, well, I mean, yeah, it sounds okay, whatever. But if you were there in 1983, it sounded incredible, especially when it came on the radio in the middle of Wang Chung and Duran Duran. And the first thing I usually think of when I hear it these days, and probably would have thought of in 83 if I was any older and more mature a listener at the time, is that it clearly sounds like an opening track on a band's third album, way more than on their first. But I had no idea in 1983 that this wasn't their first album. None of my friends knew that. But this, and I mean the album, is definitely the sound of a band that's been playing the club circuit and writing material for a long time and doing it enough that they're really great at it by this point. And make no mistake, Quiet Riot is absolutely a great live band in 1983 and 84. They probably were for many years before that. But I saw them when I was 13. It was my first actual live rock concert. In fact, I've talked about that on here somewhere before. I'm pretty sure it was early in the summer or late in the spring of 84, not long before Condition Critical came out. They were playing songs from Condition Critical at that show. And they were a great live band. They sounded positively fantastic. They put on a great show, too. Does anyone else remember hearing this song play in Footloose the first time you saw the movie in 84? When Ren gets pulled over by the cops in his yellow VW Bug for listening to this? That's one of those moments when you realize something is happening. We were like, what? Our music in a movie? It was a moment of pure joy and shock. Oh, yeah. By the way, Rudy Sarzo doesn't play the bass on this song. That's Chuck Wright, the other Quiet Riot bassist, the one who would wind up back in the band for their QR3 album in 86, and basically who stayed in the band off and on until 2021 when Rudy finally came back. The way all that worked out, according to the Wikipedia page and Rudy's own 2017 book, Off the Rails, the band parted ways with bassist Chuck Wright early in the recording of Mental Health, and replacement Gary Van Dyke was not working out. Vocalist Kevin DuBrow asked the band's former bassist Rudy Sarzo to take part in the recording of Thunderbird, a song written as a tribute to the band's founder, Randy Rhoads, who died in a 1982 plane crash. While DuBrow began writing the song while Rhoads was alive, it wasn't completed until after the guitarist's death. The partnership was quite fruitful, and Sarzo ended up recording several songs with the band, and he ultimately left his spot with Ozzy Osbourne to rejoin Quiet Riot as a permanent member. Which, by the way, got Rudy punched in the face by a significantly inebriated and still sort of pissed off and bitter Ozzy Osbourne several months later, when Quiet Riot and Ozzy both took part in the now legendary 1983 US Festival. Anyway, I find it pretty ironic that Rudy Sarzo didn't actually play on the most iconic track from this album, considering this is the bass line on the album I think of as the most distinctive and memorable. And it's not Rudy. Just interesting. Track 2, Come On, Feel the Noize. The Slade cover written by Noddy Holder and Jim Lake. This is the song that broke the band in a massive way in August, a cover of the Slade song, and the reason I haven't been able to post this album on my channel yet, given that Slade, for some reason, apparently won't allow it to be shared on YouTube, at least in this form, even though they obviously didn't seem to give a shit at all if someone wanted to share Quiet Riot's cover of Mama, We're All Crazy Now, which was included on Condition Critical just a year later. You know, Come On Feel the Noize is one of those songs that whenever someone mentions it, or I just hear or see the title, I'm like, yeah, I remember that. I remember hearing it like every day for years, and I never ever need to hear it again. But whenever I do hear it, I'm like, wow, is that ever a great cover? Possibly one of the greatest covers of all time. Such a great choice that it just feels like it was really a Quiet Riot song all along instead of someone else's. Now, it probably does help that I never heard of Slade prior to hearing Quiet Riot's version of this song, but I don't know that it was really going to matter, honestly. The Quiet Riot version, to me, is the definitive version, especially when you go find Slade's version on YouTube and see their singer doing this track in his little brown leprechaun outfit. 5 stars. Track 3, Battle Axe. Obviously, Carlos Cavazo. Is it Eruption? No. Did that matter to me in 1983? No. Does that matter to me in 2024? Not at all. 5 stars. Though I do have to say here, Carlos as a guitarist was at least 1,000 times more enjoyable to listen to stylistically on Rat's Infestation album than I ever thought he was in Quiet Riot. The dude just took leaps and bounds as a player in the years in between those albums, to my ear. Track 4, Slick Black Cadillac, written by Kevin DuBrow. Man, am I ever glad the decision was made to include this song on Metal Health, even though it had already appeared on the band's 1978 album, Quiet Riot 2. I wish I could know how many of you have ever tried to record a song in any kind of a recording studio or a home studio or whatever, because then I would know how hard to try to explain what it actually would take to perform a song this well on tape. It's just a remarkable performance. It really is. They all are. But that intro background vocal, one of the first I can think of that came along, setting a bit of a trend that would continue on several 80s hard rock and metal albums, like Under Lock and Keys,
In my dreams, it's still the same. Your love is strong, it still remains.
Slippery When Wet,
Shot through the heart, and you're too late, darling. You give love a bad name.
Hysteria,
Step inside, walk this way, you and me, babe. Hey, hey!
and many more for years to come. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this was the first time anyone ever did that. Obviously, it wasn't. It was happening back in the 70s, too, and the 60s. Nowhere Man, the Beatles. But it was the first time I can remember hearing that happen on a hard rock or metal album in a really memorable way. And either way, it was definitely one of the best instances of that big vocal intro to a song that just made you go, wow, I know what's coming here. I remember this being the moment where, when I was first hearing this on my friend's cassette, I had the thought, wow, another great song? 5 stars. One of my favorite tracks on the album. Especially love that guitar part in the break that we get from Carlos. Great stuff. Track 5, Love's a Bitch, Baby, written by Kevin DuBrow.
Love's got me by the ass again. I've been alone since I don't know when. I keep on running and I don't know why. Love's given me a pack of lies. I'm a breath and I'm out of time. Misery is what I find. Love's a bitch, baby. Love's a bitch.
I love that fade out from Slick Black Cadillac to the fade in of Love's a Bitch. Holy crap, do I think this song is great. I think after years of hearing everything else, this has got to be my favorite track on the album. Yes, that obviously means it gets 5 stars too. That vocal by DuBrow, jeez. Kevin DuBrow was never my favorite singer, not even for a split second. But that doesn't mean I just dismiss his vocal abilities, not at all. That dude could sing. Okay, that dude could scream, but he could also sing. That's a pretty lethal combination. And at this point in 1983, I'm thinking, holy crap, what an album. Or at least, what a side one. And then I flip the tape over, push play, and think, what happened? Track 6, Breathless, written by Kevin DuBrow and Carlos Cavazo.
Mind control, that's what you take from me. Down my soul, and you won't let me be. Stop me in my tracks, there's no looking back. I can't see, no, it's much too late. I feel fate. You take my breath away, you leave me breathless. You got me helpless. You take my breath away.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. I hear this today and I'm like, yeah, that's not bad. But not bad is about all I can really get to, even after all these years for some reason. And that translates to 3 stars for me. It's a decent song. Track 7, Run for Cover, also written by DuBrow and Cavazo.
You better get yourself running. I got a hurricane coming. No warning surprise. I'm gonna take my leave. I wanna plant my seed. Don't let it shock you. Hold tight, hold tight. You better run for cover. I'ma hit one lover. Run for cover tonight. Get ready.
Same for this one. Decent song. That's about it, really. 3 stars. It's fine. Whatever. Track 8, originally on side 1 as track 3, Don't Want to Let You Go. Written by Kevin DuBrow and Carlos Cavazo again.
Everybody wants to have a girl like you, but I'm the one and it's right. Somebody comes along and says they play a song. My wish becomes his delight. He'll try to take it from me. Don't wanna let you go. Not gonna get far from me. Don't wanna let you go. You're special, you're one of a kind, so don't wanna let you go. Something's money can buy.
And these days, I really like this song. I do. But not when I hear it at track 3. No, for me, it definitely belongs on side 2 of this album. In fact, I'm not really even sure it belongs on this album sometimes. But I do give it 4 stars. I like the song. Unfortunately, when you put it on side 2 instead of Battle Axe, side 2 is just a bunch of songs I really don't need to hear. But when you put it on side 1, where it was on the LP, it just sort of pulls side 1 way, way down for me personally. If you feel different, hey, good for you. That's great. I wish I did. This is the other track Chuck Wright played bass on, by the way. Track 9, Let's Get Crazy, written by Kevin DuBrow.
Looking for some action, want a mean machine. Getting hot and nasty, climbing in between. I'm a rocket in the morning, and in the night, I'm gonna find a mama makes me feel right. Get down, let's get crazy. Right now, let's get crazy. All right.
And now we come to my clear least favorite track on the Metal Health album. I gave it 2 stars. I remember thinking the only real standout thing about this track was when my friends and I heard the line, "I want to kiss your lips, not the ones on your face," and lost our minds.
Want to kiss your lips, not the ones on your face.
Otherwise, this track is one of those that many of you, if I'm not mistaken, will be annoyed that I am only, well, annoyed by. If you like it, that's great. It just does nothing for me, and it never has. This track is one of the things that kept me from wanting to play side 2 of my cassette, honestly, because I knew when this came on, I was going to have to fast forward through it, and I didn't want the time or trouble of doing that. I do remember they played this song when my friend Eric and I saw them live in '84. And I remember looking around at the other people there and thinking, oh, these other people really seem to like this song. What's wrong with me? But we can't help how we feel. And I've always just felt like this song was not great. And because of that, not being able to help how we feel, I'm not entirely sure I ever really heard this song until I found out in an interview from one of my rock magazines that it was written about Randy Rhoads. Track 10, Thunderbird, written by Kevin DuBrow.
Hello, you. Yes, it's me. You can come back. You're flying free. You think you found everything that you need. Fly away. Fly away to your new home. Across the seas, leave your nest. Oh baby, leave the best thing that you've been. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Fly on, Thunderbird, fly. Fly on, spread your wings to the sky. Fly on, Thunderbird, fly.
And at that point, I pulled the tape out again and listened to this song specifically, probably for the next several days straight. And I have loved it ever since. 5 stars. Okay, so that's a total of 42 stars divided by 10 tracks, which equals a total album rating of 4.2 stars. The album went on to sell more than 10 million copies worldwide and over 6 million in the US alone. Okay, so from here, Quiet Riot went on to become one of the biggest bands in the world and had a great career and stayed on top of the hard rock mountain for decades to come, right? Well, no, of course not. From here, Quiet Riot, a band that had labored their asses off in the LA metal scene year after year, watching original guitarist Randy Rhoads eventually go on to attain legend status, playing on Ozzy's first 2 solo albums, Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, went on to see lead singer Kevin DuBrow sound like a total asshole in interview after interview later in '83 and pretty much all of '84, talking absolute shit about Motley Crue and Nikki Sixx, who had once been recruited by DuBrow for Quiet Riot because Sixx, who at that point was in the LA band London, was considered a chick magnet, and DuBrow thought, hey, that'd be great for Quiet Riot. Only Randy Rhoads, still in the band at that point, said pretty emphatically, no, we can find somebody who plays better. And now, a couple of years later, Kevin DuBrow is busy telling all the magazine's massive, huge Motley Crue fans, like me, how Motley was a bunch of no-talent posers who couldn't write a song to save their life, and they sucked and they were horrible. Only problem was, we all immediately called his bluff because we considered Motley to be 10 times the band, and specifically Nikki Sixx 10 times the songwriter anybody in 1983 Quiet Riot was. And while Quiet Riot had a much higher likelihood of getting a song on the radio at that time, Motley was one of those rare bands that almost automatically seemed to engender an almost fanatical loyalty among their fans, while Quiet Riot's stupid, shitty interviews were rapidly killing them. And their fan base would never return because we couldn't understand why DuBrow would be talking shit about the band we really loved when he could have just been a nice guy instead and allowed Quiet Riot to go on for years to come by not forcing us to choose a side. That's exactly what happened to Quiet Riot, by the way. Don't let anyone tell you anything different. It wasn't because Condition Critical was a terrible album, because it's not. It was DuBrow's big fucking mouth that got these guys shoved to the back row of the rock band class picture in 1984 and beyond after they had the world by the balls in 1983. I'll be back at some point with the Condition Critical review. I don't know if that's next, but I will definitely be here to talk about that album. Take it easy, hard rockers. Later.